Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/35th scale British Sherman 1C hybrid hull Firefly. Unlike many of the other smaller scale builds which are listed on my video listings, in which those builds are built for private commission and belong to a private collector, the model that you see here is built for my own personal collection, is not for sale and or purchase. However, like I often mention, I often take on commission builds from models ranging from 1/35th scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@EastCoastArmory.com. The model that you see here is built mostly out of the box, however, does feature several aftermarket and detail upgrades, in which we'll be going over these additions and modifications in this video. First, a quick walk around the model. As most of my viewers know, the Firefly is a British upgunned M4 Sherman tank. These vehicles started off as your standard 75mm equipped VVSS Shermans. They were upgraded by the British by adding the 17-pounder anti-tank gun, which gave the tank better abilities to knock out and contend with German armor. The most common version of the Sherman Firefly was that based on the Sherman 5, which is the British designation of the long-hulled M4A4 Sherman tank. However, in addition to upgunning those vehicles, a large number of smaller, shorter-hulled Shermans were also upgraded. These were known as Sherman ICs. The tanks with the IC designation are usually tanks with short hulls, either a all-welded M4 Sherman or, in this case, a composite-hulled M4 Sherman tank. The purpose of using a composite hull was in an effort to try to streamline the production of the vehicle in order to produce more units quicker. The original M4 Sherman utilizes a hull that is comprised out of a mosaic of both rolled and cast components. Getting all these components to fit in a jig and welding them all together can be considered time-consuming and not as efficient as having an all-cast unit. In addition, the all-cast hulled M4A1s were also a little bit problematic, and now you have to have a very large mold to create these components, which can also take time. The idea was to create a hybrid where you take the best portions of the welded with the best attributes of the cast units, and that was what you have here with the composite hull tank. This version here featured the tail end of the rolled steel welded Shermans, however, the all cast form of the M4A1s. These vehicles utilize the exact same radial engine as the M4 Sherman, as well, which was also still used on the M3 Lee and M7 Priest. This style of Sherman was produced up until the later hull variants started coming on off the production line, namely with the wet storage, as well as with the later hull design being mostly rolled plate, with only one or two pieces made out of cast components. This hull design really sped up production and was the final evolution of the Sherman's hull. A large number of these vehicles were produced, and many of which saw action with the United States Army, but as well as this style of vehicle was widely exported to Great Britain, as well as other allies to the United States. These Lend-Lease vehicles were the ones that the Brits went ahead and modified and retrofitted them into the Firefly specs. While in the Firefly configuration, these vehicles were used by the British, as well as the Commonwealths, like Canada, as well as some Polish armor units were also equipped with these vehicles. Also, a little lesser known fact that the United States Army also utilized a large number of these IC Fireflies towards the very tail end of the war, as supplies of M4A3E8s at that time were becoming very scarce, and the United States Army Armor Corps was utilizing any type of Sherman that they could get their hands on. Before I go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started to get an idea what the base starter kit looked like. And here goes the model prior to its start. For the base kit, I'll be utilizing this vintage Dragon Firefly Ic hybrid hull. The kit itself, like I mentioned, is a vintage model kit. Came out from Dragon or DML back in the mid-1990s, more specifically 1996. In addition to the tank, I will also be utilizing a set of rubber AFV Club tracks. Once I open up the box, I will go into more detail about that. As for the kit itself, as you can see, for the models of graphic design, it's your standard style box art for a Dragon at the period, where you have the tank is in the center with a nice rendition diorama scene. It's also important to note that the illustrator went ahead and made the standard mistake of making the rear idler wheel as well as the return rollers in rubber, and if anyone is frequent of my videos, you'll know that that's not the case. They're all steel wheeled. As for the rest of the tank's graphic design, it claims here that you can build that this kit can be built in 2 different ways. However, once I open up the kit and show the contents, you'll see that that's kind of erroneous and not the case. And this here is a picture of the tank built in its other option. Before I go any further with the unboxing, the kit itself was acquired off of eBay several years ago and has been sitting in the stash ever since, which is evident by the dust that's on the box's surface. As for the kit itself, it's an all-injection molded plastic kit from Dragon. Now, Dragon at this time was really starting to take off as a plastic model company. About 2 years before the release of this kit, Dragon released their first generation Sherman tanks, which, if memory serves, were an M4A3 E8 based series. Those kits were actually a hybrid, so to speak, of kits where some of the tooling was Dragon and the other tooling was actually licensed from Italy, namely the upper and lower hull components. At this time, Dragon was, again, still an upstart company, and rather than investing money into tooling up components such as lower hulls and suspensions, they went ahead and used those parts from Italy, while they used their own tooling to come up with the HVSS or the E8 specific components, namely the turret and the HVSS suspension. With the success of both of those kits, Dragon went ahead and started tooling up more versions of Sherman tanks. This kit here being one of them. Inside here, you will see some of the parts that have the look and feel of the Italy tanks, however, have been modified and tweaked by Dragon. The parts that have been tweaked are going to have more accurate resemblance and also are going to have a different layout on the runners. Opening up the box, you will see that the inside parts are all molded in your standard Dragon plastic. Starting with the turret, this runner here is from their first generation Firefly. The parts do feature some good cast texturing. Moving on from the turret, takes us to the lower hull. Now this is where you're going to start seeing the Italy-esque components that I mentioned earlier. Starting with the pan for the lower hull. It's very Italy-esque with its detail layout, as well as with its extender pieces which need to be glued on. If any of my viewers have built the Italy Shermans before, you'll know exactly what I'm referring to. Here goes the suspension. The suspension is identical to the Italy's in that you have once assembled, the swing arms can rock back and forth and gives you a form-fitting suspension. As for the sprockets, you have the dual styles. You have the solid spoke and the hollow spoke. They glue onto the center drum, just like they do on the Italy kits. And even the center hubcap peg would have been present, but looks like it was broken off. Moving on further, takes us to the upper hull. First with the transmission cover. This transmission cover here is the Italy single-piece transmission cover. However, has added cast texturing on it, which kind of sort of looks like on the Master they just brushed on some sand or rough paint. And it has the separate rivet bolt strip, just like the Italy units. We have the bow hatches, as well as some of the other upper deck fittings. Moving on to the actual hull itself. The hull is a composite hulled Sherman tank, which means it's welded all the way towards the rear and casted towards the front. Cast texturing appears to be very nicely done by Dragon. The Dragon also tried to replicate the rolled steel pitting appearance of flat plate. It looks like on the Master, the guy just took a Dremel and just drizzled it all over to get the effect that you have here. All in all, a very decent appearance for the kit's tooling. Digging down further, we have here some other American tank fittings. Now, what's interesting is that these parts here are like to be hodgepodge from several Dragon kits. This runner here is from their M26 series, and this runner here is from their M4A4. Obviously, not all these parts are going to be utilized on this build. Digging down further takes us to some more options for road wheels and even another style of transmission cover. All in all, this kit has 3 styles of transmission cover to utilize. The last plastic parts in the box are the tank's track. Being a Dragon kit of this time period, the kit supplies you with static, individual link, and length track. If anybody is a fan of my videos will know that I have an utmost disdain for these track links, and they will not be utilized on this build. Rather, in their place, I'll be utilizing a set of vinyl rubber tracks from AFV Club. These tracks, like I mentioned, I've used in the past and really are a fantastic addition in lieu of the static tracks that we have here. As for the tracks themselves, they do have some decent detailing on them. You have 2 separate styles. You have the 3 rivet chevron style, and you just have the standard rubber pad style, your option to choose. On the very bottom of the box takes us to a decal sheet with several options available. You have here your instructions. As you can see, there are going to be several portions of the build that are not going to be used. And what's neat about kits of this period is that in addition to the plastic components, they also gave you some of the brush guards and other components in photo etch. At the time, this was groundbreaking, and not a whole lot of companies were doing this for a standard release kit. The photo etch itself is very good and will definitely be used on this build. Now, one thing that I mentioned before that is not seen on this kit is the fact that the kit indicates that you can build 2 separate Shermans from this version here. You can build the kit as a Firefly or as a standard 75mm composite hulled Sherman. However, as you can see from the components, there are no turret components available to build the tank as a 75. The only turret that is supplied with the kit is the turret for the Firefly, as well as a 17-pounder gun, and as there are no 75mm, as well as the single hatch turret components. Starting with the model suspension and running gear, the VVSS suspension that you see here is the kit original and is built out of box with no mods added. Since the Dragon Shermans trace their lineage back to the Italeri series of Sherman tank kits, the suspension is form-fitting and is adjustable with terrain. This is a nice touch in case you want to have your vehicle on a diorama in which it articulates to the terrain. Just like with my other Sherman tank videos on my channel, I always advocate in painting the Zerk Fittings red on all of the road wheels, as well as the return rollers. This is a feature found on the real Sherman tanks, and when added to the model, really help make it pop. Now, on this kit here, the Zerk Fittings are present on the road wheels, as well as the rear idler wheel. The return rollers do not have their fittings molded in. However, 2 little dots of red paint, like I have done here, imply the Zerk Fittings are present, and at a standoff distance, make it look like that they are there, which also helps the look of the build. Moving our way to the sprocket. The sprockets are the kit original and are the Italeri style design with the changeable sprocket teeth with the center hub. Now, on this kit here, the stem, which usually emerges from the hub, was broken and was missing. In its place, in order to mount it to the transmission, I went ahead and fabricated 2 little resin discs to be used as spacers. The resin discs were mounted to the sprocket and allowed me to go ahead and add a center steel rod to mount the sprockets to. With the addition of the steel rod, the sprockets are on nice and secure and will never have the chance of falling off or breaking over time. With the sprockets out of the way, it takes us to the tank's track. Like I mentioned in the unboxing scene, the track on the model is not the kit original. The kit supplies you with the individual style Lincoln length track, of which I am not a huge fan of, and in its place I replaced them with the single piece vinyl tracks from AFV Club. As you can see, the tracks now that they are on fit perfectly with and time excellent with the Dragon sprockets. The teeth contour nicely and do not emerge, which helps the look of the model. And also the track fits well with the rest of the tank's suspension. As for the track pattern itself, this is the 3-rivet style track, which was very present on Chrysler built Shermans, many of which wound up in British Lend-Lease hands. The track features a steel outer portion and a inner portion which is made out of rubber. It's difficult to see in this scene, however there's 2 shades of color used on the tracks for both the inner and the outer patterns. The weathering is also different due to the material. The exterior, as you can see, has its scratched steel surface, while the interior here has its worn rubber appearance in order for it to be more prototypical of the real one. One issue that I did encounter when assembling the track was that of the track's tension. Because of the way the track is mounted on the Sherman, the tension snapped the rear idler wheel from the idler mount. In order to repair it, I went ahead and took the broken idler axle and drilled a small hole through the axle and another corresponding hole through the idler mount. With a small steel pin added, everything was reassembled and the track went on without any issues. Now this only happened to one side, and the other side had 0 issues with that of the idlers. This is a common occurrence, specifically on Italeri tanks, due to the way the track is tense with the material that the track is represented in. However, I've also had this happen to me on occasion on some Tamiya tanks as well, and it is something to watch out for any model tank kit with vinyl track. Another final addition I made to the suspension is that of the 4 bracket mounting holes, which are found on the faces of all the VVSS bogie housings. If anyone is a fan of my 1/6 scale tank videos and watch my Sherman videos, you'll know that on there I mentioned that the VVSS bogie housing has mounting bracket holes on either side of the bogie face. This is so that the same casting can be used for either side of the vehicle, and you simply mount on the return roller bracket on the opposite side when mounting to the opposite side of the tank. These holes are missing on just about every single 1/35 scale model, and to add them, a simple small micro Dremel bit in these 4 locations here really and greatly help the look of the piece and the model as a whole. Moving on from the suspension takes us to the rear plate. The rear plate of the tank is basically built out of box. One mod that I made though was to the eyelets. I went ahead and drilled out the eyelets with a Dremel. This was done on both the rear and front plates. By drilling these out also helps the look of the model. Also, as of note, on British Fireflies and British Shermans in general, the standard American tow hitch was replaced with that of this giant leaf spring setup that we have here. A truck leaf spring with a tow hitch bolted to it was used in place. Moving towards the front of the model takes us to the front fenders. The front fenders that you see here are again kit supplied and do have their support detailing present. The support that is molded into the piece is that of the one that runs along the transmission cover, which is a nice touch. One modification I made though was I added the second piece, which is missing from the kit, and that is of the vertical portion of the brace. The piece is fabricated out of a thin piece of aluminum, which was cut to the shape and then installed to the fender. Adding it also makes the fenders pop from the kit original. Moving up to the bow, takes us first to the what used to be the bow M1919 machine gun. What a lot of people are unaware of is that when the British upgunned the Shermans to the 17-pounder gun, due to the longer rounds that the gun uses, in order for all the spare ammunition to be stored inside the tank, the assistant driver position was deleted. All of the equipment was removed in order to make room for the new ammunition racks for the 17-pounder gun. As for the gun, since the seats and all the other equipment was removed, so was the 1919. In its place, a large steel slab was added in to act as a plug in order to build up the armor now that the machine gun was deleted. This component here is supplied with the kit. One addition I made to it was I sculpted on the well beads, which would have been present on the real component. As for the brush guards, the brush guards that you see here are the kit originals, and they are the photo etch versions that come with the kit. The kit also comes with plastic versions in case the builder cannot bend the photo etch or has difficulty with working with photo etch. The kit ones, the plastic ones supplied with the kit, is a good alternative. One addition I made to the brush guards, like I always do on my Sherman builds, was I added the little canisters which are mounted to either side of the brush guard. The kit only supplies you with the brush guards for the headlights. However, the siren is the kit original plastic version, as was not included with the photo etch. The photo etch was also included for the rear taillights as well, and again are a nice feature which were supplied with this kit. Moving along the sides of the model, this tank, being a composite hulled Sherman, features a unique layout for the extra applicant armor. Due to the front angle of the casted section at the factory, the front applicant armor plate was actually subdivided into two pieces. The first half here was welded to the rolled steel section, while another piece was added to the contoured section. These are distinctive by having a large weld bead that cuts across the corner section of the plate. The weld bead that you see here is present on the kit, and the contour is nicely done and fits very well with the kit's tooling. As for the other detailing on the side, we can see that also, in addition to the weld bead here, these composite hull Shermans were very distinctive in having a very large and prominent weld bead present on where the cast hull section met the rolled steel section. This is also present on the other side of the tank. Now, the kit does have these components pre-molded into the piece. However, due to the way the tank is molded, the weld bead is not nearly as distinctive and as present as it should be. The weld bead that you see here was added by myself and was sculpted out of putty in order to get the weld present that you see on this model. Also, while on this side, you can see another distinctive piece is that the applicant armor on the driver's side is missing that little connection piece that's present on the opposite side. On this side of the tank is simply cut off, and you have this distinctive angle cut for the applicant armor. This is due to the way the ammunition racks were originally laid out on the 75mm gun. Moving down from the armor plate takes us to the fender rail. The fender rails are molded into the tank and are nicely done in that they actually descend below the sponson. One modification that I made, which really helps the look, is that with a Dremel, with a small Dremel bit, I went ahead and drilled out the little holes for the mounts of the fender. Sherman tanks are very distinctive of having this detail present. This was done to both the rails on the sides as well as the two rails that are found on the rear. Like with all Sherman tanks, the rear mud flap section is held on with 3 fasteners as opposed to the more numerous fasteners required for the side skirts. Moving along takes us to this rear box. British Fireflies are very distinctive in having this box present on the rear panel of the tank. While on American tanks, if we recall, there is a folding rack that is typically mounted in this position here. Moving up from the rack or the box takes us to the fire extinguishers. British tanks are also known to have 2 red canister fire extinguishers mounted on the rear portion of the Sherman tanks. The components you see here are kit supplied and are nicely rendered and were simply painted and added. Moving from the extinguisher takes us to the Growler storage bins. These Sherman tanks, to store the track Growlers, there is a small little cavity in this portion here of the vehicle, which is directly behind the fuel tanks. In order to put in the Growlers, you would simply take a fastener and remove this vent that we have here. The purpose of the vent is to help the track Growlers dry and aerate out when not in use. Keep in mind these pieces would typically be wet and muddy, and if kept in a sealed container, can begin to rust. So this vent here was developed in order to have them aerate. These vents are distinctive in having a mesh grill cover like you see it here. The mesh grills that you see here are actually included with the kit and are made out of photo etch, and also a very nice addition that Dragon added. Moving along takes us to the gun cleaning staves. These staves here are actually rods which would telescope and when bolted together would be used to help clean the main gun. Now, because of the longer barrel of the 17-pounder gun, the British had to develop longer cleaning staves in order to do that. Now, the staves were developed and mounted into this location that we have here. This part here is purely found on Fireflies, and if you were building this Sherman with a 75mm gun, this component here would not be utilized. This version here is kit supplied and was nicely done and mounted as per the kit. Moving up from the staves takes us to the drainage holes. Just like on all of my Sherman builds, with a small Dremel bit, I go ahead and Dremel out 2 small holes in these bullet splash rims. The purpose of these holes is that when the tank is outside and it's raining, the holes allow the water to drain out and preventing them from pooling up in these locations over here. By adding these holes also helps the look of the model. Moving up to the tank's turret. The turret is built out of box and assembles very easily and quickly. One modification though that I did have to make to the turret is that on the lower portion of the rear bustle, the kit was somewhat oblong. Because of that, it was actually striking the rear detailing here of the rear upper hull. To remedy this with a Dremel, I went ahead and removed some of the material in this location, making the turret more symmetrical and round, which allowed the clearance for these components. In addition to removing the material, another modification that I made to the kit was I replaced the kit supply's 17-pounder barrel. The barrel that originally came with the kit was a 2-piece plastic affair and was actually very soft in detailing, namely on the gun muzzle end. Rather than trying to salvage and reuse the kit barrel, I went ahead and replaced it all together with an aluminum gun barrel from RB model. There is the item number along from the vendor where I picked it up from. The barrel itself is very nicely done in that the barrel section is made out of CNC'd aluminum. The rifling is present on the muzzle end of the barrel. As for the muzzle brake itself, it is made out of 2 pieces of CNC brass along with a retaining washer. The muzzle brake itself does have a small seam which is easily buffed away with some thick super glue. Once completed, the piece is very nicely detailed and is very highly recommended. The barrel is also a very simple install. It is literally a drop-in installation and replaces some of the kit supplied parts in order to properly mount it in. Here we can see the inside of the unit. The yoke is actually a piece of CNC brass, and the barrel has a threaded section which is CNC directly into the barrel itself. You simply insert the component, and with this supplied fastener, you thread it on to the correct tightness. Once that is done, the barrel is permanently attached and can pivot up and down. As you can see, due to the fastener, the component is on nice and tight and will not fall off or get loose on you over time, which can be the issue with several plastic gun barrels. Moving our way to the antennas. The antennas that you see here are the kit supplied units and are replicating that of British style antennas. Unlike American vehicles, which utilize the MP48 or the MP37, the British used a different radio setup, and their antennas had a different set of insulators. The one that you see here is that of a rubber insulator, while this version here is the spring insulator, which is housed in a very distinctive cage. The cage that you see here is kit supplied and is actually made out of photo etch. To assemble the cage, I found it best to actually solder it, is completing the circle. Once the component is soldered, you can then bend and mount the rest of the cage to its appropriate location. I found that if you just try to assemble the piece with glue alone, it will break apart and be brittle on you, and you will fail to crisply be able to mount the piece to the antenna base itself. Soldering was the best way to do it. As for the rear antenna base, just like with the fuel caps, I went ahead and added the drainage hole. Real Shermans had this component here for the same reason, to prevent water from pooling up in this location. The rest of the turret detailing on the kit is very nicely done. It has the Firefly style square loader's hatch, along with a photo etch metal hatch stop. There is even a rubber piece to glue onto the backstop, just like the real model. The smoke grenade mortar has its distinctive British rain guard, which is a nice touch and added by Dragon. One addition that I made to the kit, which is supplied with the model, however is not intended to be used, is that of the Vane Sight. The Vane Sight that you see there was a part on a runner which was supplied with the kit and is spare from their M26 Pershing sets. It's not mentioned in the instructions to utilize that component. However, since it's supplied, it's a simple drop-in installation to the turret that you see here, and once added, does help the look. This is also true for the tank's M2 50 caliber machine gun. The 50 is not included in the instructions to use. However, it is present on the same runner as the Vane Sight and assembles very nicely and installs very easily. The Dragon 50 caliber is a very nice component. It's very nicely detailed. The only modification I made was I Dremeled out the bore of the barrel with a Dremel bit. Moving our way to what is probably one of the most iconic parts of painting a Firefly, and that is of the gun barrel. As you can see here, the barrel has its forward half painted with this elaborate camouflage scheme. The purpose of this paint pattern is to conceal the fact that this tank here is a Firefly, equipped with a 17-pounder gun. Moving our way to what is probably one of the most iconic parts of painting a Firefly, and that is of the gun barrel. As you can see here, the barrel has its forward half painted with this elaborate camouflage scheme. The purpose of this very elaborate camouflage on the barrel is to conceal the fact that this tank is equipped with a 17-pounder anti-tank gun. The German tankers knew what this Firefly was, and so they would actually target these vehicles first. To prevent this, the British Army developed this color scheme in which half of the barrel was painted, while the other half was left with its standard olive drab. As you can see here, this portion of the vehicle and rearward is the exact same length of the 75mm gun. Now, when the Shermans would be moving in formation, this vehicle here, along with the other 75mm tanks, would blend in better with their shorter guns and would not be spotted as easily by a spotter or a German tanker. There were several styles adapted to be used for the camouflage pattern. The one that you see here is black with a white wavy muff. This here is very reminiscent to what is typically found on battleships from the World War I and World War II time period. and once added to the vehicle really helps it pop compared to just leaving the barrel its standard olive drab. Overall, I'm very happy with the way the kit turned out. These Dragon kits assemble very well and have very nice detailing on them. Also, their subject matters are usually that of vehicles that typically aren't done by the other mainline manufacturers. As for a skill range, I really can't recommend this kit for a really early beginner due to the fact that you need to acquire, in my opinion, the rubber tracks as well as the metal gun barrel. However, for someone who has built one or two of the Tamiya Shermans under their belt, this is definitely something that they could level up to. The model here is really more intended for someone with an intermediate to advanced range. However, built very easily and are not nearly as daunting as some of the other kits which are found on the market. The vehicle subject matter is also very unique in the fact that it is a composite hull Sherman tank, of which there are not really a whole lot of variants of this kit represented in plastic. On top of that, the Firefly upgrade also makes it an interesting piece. This piece here is definitely recommended to anyone who is a fan of not only the Sherman, but as well as British armor, as well as Allied World War II tanks in general. This tank here can be built in several different configurations, as it was utilized by not only the British, but also the Canadians, as well as the Polish. And that concludes this model showcase video for this 1/35th scale British composite hull Sherman 1C Firefly. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, and don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thank you.